a specific category of coaches that I really like to listen to and whose work I like to read and study are coaches who coach athletes, especially major league athletes. The reason why I like to over-index a little bit for the work, the protocols, the processes that athletic coaches teach, implement, etc., is because their clients need to be able to perform on a big stage at their personal best and at the competitively highest level possible. So, for example, if somebody is coaching athletes in football, baseball, basketball, Formula One, rugby, soccer, etc., again, their clients, the athletes, have to be able to perform at a really high level. You see what I'm saying? So while there might be a lot of fluff and woo-woo stuff and basically mumbo-jumbo in the personal development and self-help space overall, right? Pop psychology, pop self-help. When it comes to what works for athletes, that shit better work. Now, when you look at the coaching insights, methodologies that coaches put out who work with athletes, mindset coaches, performance coaches, etc., who specifically work with athletes, one thing that you'll find as a common denominator, I think almost universally across the board, is helping the athlete to constantly get into a peak state, right? Getting into a state, body and mind, and congruent between the two so that the athlete then can get into a flow and perform at their best. Are you with me? I'm not going to get into the idea of state. I'm not going to nerd out right now on the idea of state. I'm just going to assume you understand what I'm saying in general. Getting to a good state, you might think of it as getting into a good vibe, getting into your flow, whatever it might be. But the idea here, the word I'm using is getting into a peak state. Now, with the context that getting into a peak state is important and is not only a correlation to, but a causality of peak performance, right? Mentally, physically, emotionally. How can we, as men in general, what are some ways that we can get into peak state? One way to get into peak state is getting to a place of gratitude and this overall sense of abundance and feelings of, I want to say, positivity. Now, in previous videos, I've shared a few different tactics that I have found to be useful for feeling more happy, no matter how bad you feel, feeling more grateful. And in this video, I'm going to give you yet another tactic that I have found to work really well for me to get me into a peak state. And I'm going to give it to you, and then I'm also going to share a silly example with you of when I use it often that actually helps me in a physical way immediately. So what I do, and if you're anything like me, sometimes if you feel like the pressure of the world is on you and your list of things that are stressing you out and the fires you have to put out is, 37 things long, and the feelings of inadequacy or insecurity or challenges are, equally as long. Positive thinking, Pollyanna stuff doesn't work. And also when you're the one that's experiencing maybe a negative emotional feedback loop from stress, issues, challenges, insecurities, whatever it might be, it can be hard or kind of harder to think and feel positive, high vibe, gratitude-based thoughts about yourself and about your life, right? Especially if you're going through shit, especially if you're shoveling shit in life and going through struggles. And I've been there many, many times, right? I wasn't I'm an immigrant from Ukraine, came to America when I was 3 years old with a single mom. We were in welfare at first and we worked our way up. So I wasn't, all that to say, I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth, and I know what it's like to start out at the bottom in life, right? Something that works for me to get into a much better state, a high vibe state, if you will, for lack of a better phrase, is to think and speak blessing about two other people out loud. They don't hear me, I'm alone. But for example, what I'll do is I'll go through a list of people in my life that I think of, and you can call it praying, you can call it wishing, you can call it commanding, whatever religion or spiritual discipline you might ascribe to, it all works here. But the way I'll do it, for example, is I'll pick somebody I know, and I'll say something like, I speak, pray, and release peace, prosperity, blessing, and abundance on, and I'll say their first and last name. All right, so John Smith. And then if I know about some things that John Smith is dealing with or working on in his life, I will then speak and pray and release verbally blessing on that area or challenge of his life. I'll speak a positive outcome, insight on that person's life. And I might spend, 30 to 60 seconds on one person. Then as soon as my mind thinks of another person, I immediately speak, pray, release, verbally command blessing and goodness on their life. For me, one of my favorite ways to start this is to use the phrase, I pray, speak, and release peace, prosperity, and abundance on and for, and then I say their name, all right? And again, I might come back to them a few times and say different things. The idea here is that if you're finding it hard to speak, pray, release, think, visualize blessing on yourself, I have found that in moments where it might be a day where I'm just dragging my knuckles, as I like to say. It's just a knuckle dragger of a day, right? Dragging my knuckles across the ground, just scraping by. I find it easier to think positive thoughts for somebody else. I find it easier. So maybe this could work for you. But what happens is that as I keep speaking, praying, releasing blessing, peace, prosperity, abundance, and good things on one person, then the next person, then the next person, next person, and next person, I start to actually feel more and more, I actually start to feel better. Like I get this feeling of, if I'm willing to speak some blessing over their life, there's got to be a God out there who cares about me and is willing to put some blessing in mine. Everything's going to be okay, I think. Like that's kind of the sense of the feeling that I start to get. And I don't know, if you study the quantum mechanics in the quantum field and how all that works, I'm not going to nerd out on that because that could make this video forever long. But, we're all in, if you believe, and I do, that we're all, and it's been proven now with quantum theory, but quantum physics, but we are all connected. Like the space between you and me that we call air, there's actually matter. And in metaphysics, if you study metaphysics at all, you understand that when you think something about somebody else and for somebody else, you send that energy stream to them. If that person is living life in a way where if their thoughts and their vibrations are in alignment with what you're sending them, they receive it. And so now you've created a positive flow and a positive link between you and them. So what happens is, and not to get too woo-woo here, but my world paradigm, my life paradigm, and my paradigm is that when you send a positive signal out into the quantum field, the universe, okay? The universe sees you as a source of positive energy, positive signal, positive frequency. And one of the mantras that I live by is life supports that which supports life. I think I heard that like back in 2016, 17 from Tony Robinson on a podcast interview. I think his name is Jairek Robbins, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's where I heard that phrase first. Maybe it was Tony Robbins himself. But it's life supports that which supports life. And that's one of my core beliefs and principles that I hold as a personal value and that I try to live by. And so the idea here is that by sending out a positive signal into the quantum field, into the universe, I become a source of positive energy. And I believe, and I've proven this in my life time and time and time again, and I've seen this happen in many other men's lives, is that when you become a source of positive energy, value, good things, you tend to get more of those. Like begets like, right? Pause that thought, by the way, side quest here, little side topic. If you think bad, negative thoughts about people, thoughts of anger, violence, revenge, harm, you want to see them do bad, you want to see them lose in some way, and you send it to them, if their consciousness doesn't see themselves in that negative light, the sages and the mystics of old teach us that if they see themselves in the same negative light, so maybe they are in agreement with that thought, when you send out that thought about them, they'll actually receive it through the quantum field and they might manifest that. But if they don't, if in their consciousness, they don't see themselves in that kind of a negative light and they don't see themselves in that kind of suffering or failure, that energy signal that you send to them, quote unquote, bounces off of them and comes back to you. Remember the old adage we used to say as kids on the playing ground, I'm rubber, you're glue, bounces off of me and sticks to you. Maybe you, at least when I was a kid, we used to say that, right? So if somebody was talking some smack on you, right, kindergarten, first grade, whatever, you'd be like, I'm rubber, you're glue, bounces off of me and sticks to you. Well, that corny little childish playground limerick applies here with just our thoughts and frequency. If I'm thinking negative shit about somebody and their consciousness and their self-thoughts don't align, there's no reciprocal harbor for that thought ship to port in, and so it turns around and comes back to me, and I'm going to manifest a life experience that is aligned with the energy of the negative bullshit I was sending them. This is why in the Bible, the teacher Jesus says, basically there's a teaching that says, y'all have heard don't do bad things to people. But I'm here to tell you that just thinking bad things about people is already the same as doing the bad things to people. Right? And then there's other verses and passages in many ancient religious and spiritual texts, not just the Bible. Read the Bible, read the Quran, right? Read the Torah, read the Havamal. Like there's so many books, spiritual texts and sacred teachings that have the same principles. And one of them is putting what you put out in thought, somehow what you sow, you reap. Thoughts seem to be equal to action. And if those two things are true, what you put out mentally and energetically comes back to you. So that was a side quest. Now, with that framework and understanding in mind, let's go back to the main topic. If I'm putting out positive energy and blessing other people, for me personally, I always, depending on how shitty I might be feeling, but within 5 to 10 minutes of doing this, I can tell you I genuinely and authentically feel a much higher, I feel myself to be in a much higher and better state. Remember, this was all about getting ourselves into peak state for peak performance. And for us, that could be just how we're showing up for our job, our work, with clients, with our spouse, our kids, our friends, whatever it might be, just getting into the best state we can get into so we can perform to the best of our ability in that circumstance. That's how I'm thinking of it, right? And so if sports and athletic coaches, one of the common denominators that they all focus on is getting into peak state, that I believe that's something worth paying attention to. And this tactic that I'm sharing with you is a way that has worked for me, where it's not forced, it's not fake. Because again, while it can feel forced and fake to say it about yourself to yourself, I find it a lot easier to speak and pray and release good things, abundance, a blessing, etc. to other people. Now, one way that I've used this regularly that works really quickly, and I think it's a little cheesy, but I'll share it with you, is every day when I wake up, the first thing I do is I work out. Most days I'm lifting, and then every so few days I'm doing active recovery, but every day I work out. On my lift days, one of the things that I do during my warm-up routine to get myself into a very high state, peak state in my mind and my body, and feel that energetic, metaphysical vibe, is I'll do something like that, where while I'm warming up, I will be speaking, praying, and releasing blessing on just a list of people that randomly comes into my mind. And I'll be saying it out loud. Now, for me, the luxury that I have is that I have my gym built in my garage. So it's not like I'm at a public gym and people are going to hear me. If you're in a public gym and you try this, you might have to say it a little quieter, right? But for me, I do this as a way to get into a peak energetic state while I'm warming up for my lift sessions and workouts. And for me, it really works. Just constantly putting out that blessing to people just lifts my energy immediately. And the other thing I found too is when I consistently practice this, it creates a better state for me for about basically the rest of the day. I just tend to have less negative, less reactive thoughts. And one closing thought I'll share about this is, there was a point in my life a couple of years back where I decided to do this for people that I held a lot of anger or resentment against or for. And when they would pop into my mind, and when normally I would have, the angry thought, the fuck them thought, the thoughts of revenge, thoughts of getting back, thoughts of whatever, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, I started to say, okay, I speak, pray, and release peace, prosperity, and abundance on, and I would name that person by name. And I would say that a few times. I would say some other blessing things for them and to them. I would pick the next person, the next person, the next person. Even if it was petty stuff, like from somebody in my social graph or extended social circle or around town, where I'm just like, might have some kind of a petty thought about them. I just started to, every time they came into my mind, instead of allowing myself to get into the negative loop about them, I started short-circuiting that negative loop and breaking it by just overwhelmingly sending as much blessing and goodness and abundance and good thoughts and energy to them. You know what happened? What started to happen, what happened in the subsequent 2 to 3 months? Out of the blue, I had one of the biggest financial seasons one of the biggest seasons of financial abundance that I've ever had in my life. It's really interesting. And I'm firmly convinced that it was because I broke so many resentment ties that I was harboring for so many years. Wayne Dyer talks about this a lot. Rest in peace. One of my favorite spiritual teachers. Love his videos that I watch on YouTube all the time. Again, he passed away some years back, but one of my favorites. And one of the things that he constantly talks about is this importance of getting rid of resentments. Because when we hold on to resentments, it's like we hold on to negative things that are burning us. Like if you're holding a hot rock and the only person it's burning is you, right? And he has this example where he talks about how the entry level to opening a door to like the next level in life, the gateway, the doorway, or just like the minimum you have to do to kind of break through to this next level of an amazing life that applies to everybody, is becoming aware of and getting rid of resentments. And that by doing that, you break karmic links, spiritual links, and bonds with that negative bullshit, and it finally dissipates. Interestingly enough, when I started applying this whole secret blessing exercise that I do for getting myself into a higher peak state. When I started applying it to people that I would consider people I don't like, enemies, people that have hurt me, basically people that I had, let's just say, some kind of resentment against. When I started doing that, just to not have as many negative thoughts, that's why I started doing it. I found that a lot of the resentments that I had dissipated and melted away. And there was measurable, massive improvement in my life on multiple fronts. The two biggest ways that I saw it happen was one, a huge boom in financial abundance. And the other thing that I saw happen was I actually saw a lot of like little aches in my body disappear. Like things that were constantly aching or hurting for a long time stopped. And I'm firmly convinced it's because I broke that resentful, angry, frustrated energy that I was hanging on to in my body and just let it go. And the way I did it was by just absolutely blessing the ever-living daylights out of those people in my mind, in my heart, and verbally by speaking. And it broke the bonds of those negative loops. So not only was it getting myself into a positive state so I could then have peak performance, but as a side benefit, it also helped me break a lot of bonds of resentment and the energy that was recreating in my life over and over and over again. But all that to say, getting into a peak state is a universally agreed upon priority you need to focus on in order to have peak performance. And one way that I found to be effective for me to get into a peak state, no matter where my mind, my heart, and my energy is to speak, pray, and release incredible abundance and goodness onto other people's lives verbally out loud. By doing that, I just immediately feel a sense of elevation mentally, spiritually, even physically. I feel better, into a better state. I use this tactic in the mornings often to get myself firing on all cylinders when I'm lifting. And when I use this and apply this tactic to try to interrupt and short circuit repetitive negative thoughts about people that I had resentments towards, not only did it work to short circuit and interrupt those negative thoughts, but it actually dissipated and broke the bonds of resentment I was feeling against those people. And I actually started to genuinely just want them to have a blessed life. So this was this little tactic that I think I first maybe read this approach from Neville Goddard. I can't remember where I first came across this, but it's been an absolute game changer for me. And I'm sharing it with you now. I'll invite you to consider trying this out. Really lean into it. You know, the first time you utter a sentence, you might not feel anything. Give it a good 5-10 minutes of just sending out blessing and good vibes to people. You know, be a secret blesser. Just send out good blessing into the world. And as corny and as cheesy as it might sound, and trust me, I mean, if you watch any of my videos, you know I'm not a woo-woo mumbo-jumbo guy, right? I'm all about results, resources, process, frameworks, right? This works. Truly, this works. Try it out. See what it does for you. This could be a real game changer for you and help you take your life to the next level this coming year.